Chapter 21 The Reunion, Part 1. Rarity groaned as she blinked her eyes open. She rolled onto her back, pushing her frazzled mane out of her eyes with a hoof, and squinted up at the painted sky above her. A surge of anger overtook her, and her horn glowed as she threw her pillow at the ceiling.
Dumb clouds!
The pillow fell back onto her face a moment later.
Oof.
She lay there for several seconds, letting the peaceful darkness take her over. There was a knocking at the door, and she ignored it.
"Lady Rarity?"
Whitehorn called. He knocked again. With immense effort, Rarity mustered the will to pull the pillow off of her face. The black smears of her mascara had been stained into the satin.
Go away!
A beat of silence passed.
"You asked to see me shortly after you returned yesterday, my lady, and you sent me away then as well. Do you need more time?"
Rarity pouted up at the ceiling.
I don't remember sending him away.
She rolled over, jerking a window curtain aside with her magic. The light of the rising sun was just peeking over a rocky hill in the distance.
"Countess?"
Rarity sighed. She must have cried herself to sleep last night, sending Whitehorn away right after she had summoned him like some petulant filly.
That is not the behavior of a proper lady, Rarity.
She chided herself as she clambered off of the bed.
Just a moment, darling.
Making her way into the bathroom, Rarity braced herself before turning on the light. She just managed to pinch off the shriek that tried to worm its way out of her throat. Black tears had been stained into her coat, and her mane looked as if she had spent all night bobbing for the deepest apples in the cider vat at one of Applejack's atrocious hoedowns. A shiver racked her body. How could she have ever allowed herself to reach such a state? She turned on the faucet and splashed a few hooves full of cold water onto her face, scrubbing the black tears away. She grit her teeth as she tugged her unruly mane into place with a levitated brush. Rarity curled her lip at the mirror in the mirror. Her cheeks were clear of the black blemishes, and her mane had returned to its usual curl, but the cracks in the mask were obvious. The stray hairs, bags under her eyes, and matted coat were clear signs of distress. She lacked the demeanor of a lady. Rarity closed her eyes, gathering her poise. She must always be a lady. She must be Countess Rarity, the last lady of Equestria. She opened her eyes, and there she was. Her posture straight and balanced, her gaze still tired yet focused. It would be impossible to hide her stress, but she could bear it with elegance. At least she could outside the privacy of her room. She spent a few seconds practicing her smile before going to answer the door.
Apologies for sending you away earlier, dear,
she said as she pulled the door open. She gave Whitehorn a weary smile.
Especially after asking for you.
Apology accepted, my lady. His mouth hung open for a moment, as if he was thinking over his next words. I heard the news.
Oh. Did you now?
Rarity grimaced at the way her voice cracked. Whitehorn lifted a hoof as if to step forwards. He was wearing only a simple gray vest. May I come in? Rarity quirked a lip as she debated with herself. There was still a part of her that wanted to shut the door in his face and wallow in blanket-smothered isolation. At last, she forced herself to step back.
What have you heard?
He dipped his head as he entered, keeping his eyes well clear of the mess of sheets on the bed. Pinkie told me what happened. Titus as well. Do you need my help, my lady? I have many friends in high places. I'm sure I could get the Duke to drop the betrothal. Rarity's heart rate quickened. Here was her chance. Maybe she could slip free of the Duke's trap.
What about the bandits?
Whitehorn cocked his head. I imagine he would execute them as he originally planned. If anything, he would do it out of spite at that point.
No!
Rarity snapped. She shook her head vehemently.
I won't be responsible for the deaths of 5 ponies!
My lady, they would have turned you in for bounty, Whitehorn said. Why are you going to such lengths to protect them? They don't deserve it.
It's the principle of the thing, darling.
Rarity pursed her lips, looking him in the eye.
There was no death sentence in my time, you know. Not even for the most hideous of monsters. The princesses didn't believe that any pony could be beyond redemption.
A noble ideal, but we must face reality, Whitehorn said. Are you really willing to give your life to Titus just to save 5 ponies that were ready to kill in order to capture you?
I have to be. Don't you see?
Rarity stepped closer, lowering her voice.
I want this the least of anyone, but what other choice do I have? If I turn that brute down, those 5 ponies will die from my decision. How could I ever say that I believe every life deserves to be lived and every offender deserves a second chance after I failed to give my all in upholding those ideas?
Her vision blurred, and she looked away before wiping the tears with a huff.
Thank you for the offer, Whitehorn, but I cannot accept it.
She heard him let out a heavy sigh behind her. There's nothing anyone could do to change your mind on this, is there? Rarity's voice was firm for the first time that day.
No.
She felt him lay a hoof on her shoulder, and she found herself leaning into it. The soft fabric of his vest was warm against her cheek. In that case, my lady, I must thank you, he said. She frowned.
What for?
Titus didn't tell me about your deal just to brag, Whitehorn said. Well, he did do more than his share of bragging, but he also agreed to help support me in Parliament. Rarity blinked. She realized how close she was to Whitehorn and pulled herself back.
But what of all this talk earlier about doing what he wants on his own land?
I do believe he hopes to ensure he has a position of power within the new system, Whitehorn said. Further, as his daughter-in-law, your interests become his. Any influence you gain in the future makes him and his line more powerful by extension.
I see.
Rarity frowned.
So we've managed to accomplish what we came for.
Whitehorn dipped down into a deep bow. Indeed we have, my lady. And it's thanks to your bravery and generosity that we've done it. The gifted table is closer to becoming a reality now than it's been in over a decade of attempting on my part. Rarity's mouth hung open.
Just like that?
Whitehorn had been trying to change the world for years, and within a week of joining him, Rarity had already made a breakthrough. She truly was making a difference. A great weight seemed to leave her shoulders as she realized that her sacrifice had much further-reaching consequences than she had first imagined, and for the better. With the fog of stress lifted from her mind, she realized that she was standing and gaping like an uncouth child, and promptly shut her jaw a scant moment before Whitehorn looked back up at her.
I'm just glad I could make a difference,
she said. As am I, my lady. Whitehorn gave her a warm smile. Rarity took a deep breath.
So what now?
Whitehorn straightened back up, fixing the wrinkles in his vest with a huff. Now we, and I do hope I can say we, must prepare to face Parliament. He glanced towards the dawn sunlight streaming in through the window. But I'd rather not burden you with yet more worries until you've had some well-earned rest. We can discuss it another time.
You aren't leaving, are you?
Rarity took a step forwards, her voice hitching. Fortunately not, my lady, Whitehorn said, flashing her another of his smiles. Titus is now our ally in the bettering of the world, though not due to any selflessness on his part. I have much to discuss with him. I expect that you and Pinkie won't be seeing the last of me for some time now. Rarity forced herself to relax.
I look forward to it.
Now, unless you require anything more of me, Countess? Whitehorn dipped his head. I'm afraid I have much business to attend to.
No. That's all, darling.
As he turned to leave, a thought occurred to her.
Actually, there is one thing.
He looked back. Yes?
Do you know where the bandits are being held?
Rarity asked.
I'd like to speak to them.
In the dungeons, no doubt, Whitehorn said. Perhaps you'd like to accompany me to the dining hall? I'm sure we could find you an escort. Rarity grimaced, looking down at her disheveled coat. She was absolutely not in the proper condition to be walking around the estate. She looked back to him with a demure smile.
Perhaps you could ask Titus to send a guide while I freshen up?
Of course, my lady. I'll leave you to it. With one more bow, Whitehorn backed out of the room and closed the door behind him. By the next time that Rarity bothered to check the clock, almost 2 hours had passed. She had bathed with her own perfumed soap she'd acquired in Straterra, thankful that she wasn't forced to use the far more offensively scented bar that came with the room, and returned her mane to its immaculate sheen. After an excursion into her clothing stock, she donned a pale yellow dress with sunny orange sleeves. For the first time since waking up, she felt like herself again. Her stomach politely informed her of its desire for food, and she found herself wondering where Pinkie Pie was.
And what about that guide I had asked for?
She opened the door to the hall and found herself locking eyes with Pontius.
Oh.
The young Pegasus was leaning against the far wall, his usual polished barding replaced with a clean orange shirt. He stood up with a start and gave her a short bow. Lady Rarity.
Pontius?
Rarity gave him a tight smile.
Were you waiting for me?
Aye, my lady, he said, looking up. You wanted to speak to the bandits? I can escort you to the dungeons.
Ah, of course.
Rarity hesitated, considering breakfast, but decided that it could wait.
Lead on, then.
Pontius started down the hall at an easy pace, and Rarity followed a short distance behind. They retraced the familiar path to the dining hall first, where Whitehorn was in the midst of conversation with Duke Titus and a few other orange-garbed ponies, all of whom bore grave expressions, and none of whom seemed to notice her polite greeting. As they left the hall for the path to the other wing of the manor, Rarity once again found herself wondering where Pinkie Pie was. They passed the entrance hall, and it occurred to her that she hadn't seen any servants either. Normally, she would have spotted a cleaning mare by now, at least. Perhaps she was imagining it, but the air of the manor seemed thick with some unspoken anticipation. She cleared her throat, drawing Pontius's attention.
Do you know where Pinkie is, darling?
She's been quite busy directing the staff in the preparation of her party, he said. It's to be held tonight, on the grounds. His eyes flicked away as he continued. My father's going to announce our betrothal.
Oh.
Rarity cringed at the way her voice hitched.
So soon?
He turned away, opening a solid wooden door that led to an upward spiraling staircase and grabbing the lantern hanging on the other side in a wing. His voice was stiff. He says that such things aren't truly official until the peasantry hears of it. Rarity grimaced as she began to follow him up the steps.
I see. The brute doesn't want me going back on our deal. Does he really think I'd leave these poor souls to die?
She couldn't help but be offended. Though a trio of slit windows on the bottom level allowed some light in, the stairwell was otherwise lit only by the dim light of Pontius's lantern. Rarity found herself thankful that she hadn't worn any shoes as they approached the top, perhaps 3 stories up by her guess. The steps were narrow in places, threatening a nasty fall at any misplaced hoof. Pontius paused as he reached the iron-banded trapdoor at the top of the stairs. After several seconds, Rarity gave a polite cough.
Darling?
It's my fault, Countess. Rarity blinked.
I beg your pardon?
He wouldn't look at her. He kept his gaze focused squarely on the trapdoor as he spoke. Why this all happened, why I got pulled into the Duke's affairs. It was my doing. Rarity frowned, glancing down at the steep stairwell descending into darkness.
Not the most proper place for a dramatic confession.
Did he believe that his little crush was what had pushed the Duke into action? She reached a hoof up to pat at one of his hind legs, the attempted comfort made awkward by the difference in altitude.
No, dear, I'm sure it's not.
It is! He punched a foreleg against the curving stone wall, causing Rarity to jump. He was going to send you away like he always does. Whitehorn's pestered him for years, and he's always sent away. Pontius turned to face her at last. The light of the lantern highlighted the hardness in his eyes, and for a moment Rarity imagined that it was Titus standing before her. Until I told him about you. Rarity's pulse quickened. She thought back to what Whitehorn had told her just a day ago. It's unlike the Duke to have changed his mind so suddenly over an infatuation of his son. She swallowed.
What do you mean?
Pontius let out a dry laugh. Don't you see? You're gifted and so powerful. You defeated a half-dozen bandits in seconds without even lifting a hoof. He licked his lips and lowered his voice, leaning in as if he was worried of being overheard. There are many powerful ponies in Equestria that would pay well to have you delivered to them, Countess. My father doesn't leave the land often, but I've seen bounties for you in town. The pieces fell together in Rarity's mind.
And you told him about them?
He sighed. I told him. And so he let you stay. Because of me.
And the bandits?
Rarity asked. Her heart was pounding against her chest.
Is it all just some ploy?
He gave a slow shake of his head. They're real. You were so set on saving them, and my father saw opportunity. He lifted his forelegs and clapped the hooves together, as if catching a bug. He had something you wanted, and you gave yourself willingly in exchange. Thousands of bits on your head, and he could have you for a few worthless lives. The feeling of being trapped was returning to her. Titus had manipulated her into his clutches with barely an effort. She knew that he had trapped her, knew how exactly he had done it, and yet she still couldn't escape. The ponies held hostage on the other side of that heavy trapdoor were still relying on her.
I wonder which of us is more the prisoner. Why are you telling me this?
Rarity asked.
Why just now? How could I trust you?
Pontius scowled. You shouldn't trust me, any more than you should trust anyone you meet. He snorted as he turned back to the trapdoor. As for why I'm telling you, we're betrothed, Countess. I have a duty to you. Rarity was still trying to decide how best to respond when Pontius shoved himself against the trapdoor. He grunted as he bodied it open, drawing a shrill complaint from the hinges, and climbed out of the stairwell. She followed behind him, body moving on autopilot as her mind struggled to process what had been revealed to her. Could she have really been so oblivious? Titus certainly acted the part of the proud, selfish brute, but was it all just a cover for something more conniving? Rarity stiffened as she came to the realization that she hadn't been taking matters quite as seriously as she should have. All her fantasizing about being the brave heroine in some romantic fantasy, yet here she was being manipulated like some bumbling patsy. She'd fought bounty hunters not more than a week ago, and yet she was parading herself through the streets oblivious of the danger. She had to stop the dreaming and focus on reality. She couldn't trust just any pony that walked up to her and spoke of honesty. The future was a place of treachery, and who knew if this was the first time she had fallen for another's ploy? What of Whitehorn? She'd met him at a party and was blindly following him not even 3 days later. Perhaps...
Steady, Rarity.
Whitehorn had been nothing but an honest, generous spirit. If he had wanted to trap her, he had had plenty of time to do so already. Rarity couldn't help but cringe at the thought that the chief reason she knew she could trust him was because she had already put herself so freely in his hooves. Still, she mustn't let a single act drive her into paranoia.
Lady does not flinch back from glimpsed shadows.
Pulling herself back to the present, Rarity found herself in a squat, circular stone chamber. The trapdoor was set against one wall, while the far half of the chamber had been divided into 3 cells by thick iron bars. A tall, unobstructed window, large enough for a pony to step through, Rarity noted, was left open at the back of each cell. The 5 bandits all shared a single cell, bereft of anything but a single bucket and some straw for comfort. Most kept their heads down, pointedly avoiding looking at the trap door. One of them met Rarity's eye. A Pegasus stallion, a leg and a wing both swaddled in stained bandages. Long silent seconds passed. Rarity turned to Pontius.
Would you mind giving us some privacy, darling?
Pontius grimaced, but didn't protest.
I'll be waiting in the hall, my lady.
Rarity watched him go, her ears lingering on the trapdoor as she listened to his hoofsteps receding below. She turned back to the cell and met the curious eyes of the bandit mare. Taking a few steps closer, cautious to stay out of reach, Rarity searched for something to say. She nodded towards the large window at the rear of the cell.
I've never seen a prison cell with an unbarred window before.
The stallion cocked a brow. His voice was like gravel when he responded.
The good Duke believes we ought to have the right to fly if we'd prefer it, whatever fate may await us.
Rarity blinked. Her eyes darted over to his injured wing, and for a moment she wondered how many ponies had taken up the Duke's offer. How many ponies had opted for a fall in freedom over a hanging in chains? Had any survived?
Do you need anything, lass?
The stallion prodded.
If you came to listen to us groveling, thanks, you best settle in for a long wait.
I've come for no such thing.
Rarity paused, adding in a quieter voice,
Though some gratitude would be appreciated.
What for?
Rarity's brow furrowed.
Saving your life, I would imagine?
The stallion shrugged.
I'm to be thankful that I live on the goodwill of some prissy-gifted noble filly.
He spat on the floor.
My freedom was the most valuable thing I had, and now I've lost it twice over. Once to the Duke's law, once to your self-righteous crusading. I don't think for a second they have any care for me.
I gave up my hoof in marriage for you!
Rarity insisted. Her tail flicked side to side, and she struggled to contain her ire. The stallion shook his head.
Nah. You gave it for your own full ideals. My lot just happened to be in the way. You don't care for me.
Rarity stared open-mouthed at him. She glanced at each of the other prisoners in turn, but none met her eye. Some had their ears up as if they were listening, but none of them even faced her way. Rarity closed her mouth, glaring up at the impudent stallion.
What's your name?
What'd you care?
What is your name?
Rarity repeated.
I am asking you. Is it some big secret?
The stallion eyed her for a few seconds. A breeze whistled through the pony-sized windows, carrying the scent of rain with it. With a deliberate motion, he turned away from her.
So that's it then?
Rarity pressed. She again cast her gaze to the other prisoners, failing to keep the frustration out of her rising voice.
Perhaps I made a mistake in offending you all. Even now you can't present a single excuse for your actions!
She realized she was trembling, but she couldn't stop herself. Titus had manipulated her so easily, and now it seemed that even the ponies she had sacrificed herself for were playing her as well. Was there no honesty left in the world? Was she truly so naive? Was she such a monumental failure? Just as the tears began to break free, one of the other bandits finally met her eye. It was the Earthmare that had spoken during the trial Duke Titus held, the one who had recited the laws she had broken and the punishment she deserved. Her mouth hung open, almost as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came forth.
Speak!
Rarity demanded. The mayor flinched back.
I'm sorry, my lady. I never have meant for a kind spirit like you to get tangled up in our mess.
Rarity closed her eyes and drew in a deep breath. It wouldn't be proper for her to lose her temper, even now.
What's your name, darling? River Pie, my lady. Thank you,
Rarity said. She couldn't help but think about Pinkie Pie and her family. Had some member of the Pie family survived to carry on her lineage? Opening her eyes, Rarity forced a kind smile onto her face.
My name is Rarity. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance.
River Pie responded with a nervous smile of her own. She shuffled closer to the bars, shying away from the sideways looks from her cellmates.
I appreciate what you've done, even if the others don't care. Well, it's nice to know that at least one pony does,
Rarity said, shooting a glare towards the rude Pegasus stallion. She returned her focus to the skittish mare.
Can you tell me why you did it?
Clamp shut, Pie.
The Pegasus stallion growled.
What's the matter if I tell her?
River Pie shot back, her tail flicking.
As if the Duke don't already hate Nettlekiss.
Fine.
The Pegasus shook his head.
Your loss.
River looked back to Rarity.
You ever hear of Duchess Nettlekiss?
Rarity frowned. Whitehorn had mentioned her. All she knew was that she was a rival of Duke Titus's.
Once, in passing. It's her that put us up to it,
River said. She hesitated as another of the bandits turned to eye her, then pressed on.
She gave us weapons and training and paid us well. All we had to do was rough up some of the Duke's caravans and threaten bits from a few scared peasants.
Rarity's heart sank.
Titus was right? So you did it for greed?
River Pie dropped into a low bow so suddenly that for a moment, Rarity imagined that she had been struck.
I don't deserve your mercy, my lady, but if you still see fit to save me, I swear to you, I'll make it up.
Rarity couldn't help but take a step back from the dirty mare groveling beneath her. Who was she to have ponies bowing and swearing their unworthiness of her favor? River had plainly admitted to having no purpose behind her ill deeds beyond her own thirst for wealth, and Rarity imagined that she should have felt furious. Yet she could only muster an aching sadness. Worst of all, she still couldn't bring herself to take it back. For even if every other bandit returned to their crimes once they were released, as long as just River Pie kept true to her word and did better, it was worth it.
Nobody is truly beyond redemption. Right?
Rarity wondered if maybe River was just pretending to be remorseful. Perhaps the mare was just worried that Rarity would go back on the deal and she would be doomed to hang after all, and she was just acting the part to ensure her own survival. Rarity dismissed the thought an instant later. Deep paranoia lay down that path, and she decided she would rather keep some amount of earnest naivete in favor of living in a world where every word hid another meaning and every act served another purpose. Maybe it would ruin her to do so, but then wouldn't she be ruined even more so if she allowed the world to twist her into its treacherous mold?
Thank you for your honesty,
Rarity said. She turned away, pulling open the heavy trapdoor with her magic.
I do hope you don't squander my generosity.
The door fell closed behind her with a heavy thud that echoed through the ghastly darkness of the stairwell. She pursed her lips as she followed the steps down, lost in her thoughts. As he had promised, Pontius was waiting in the hall, fidgeting with his shirt's collar in the far less sinister lighting. He dipped his head in greeting.
I hope all went well, my lady.
She responded with a wan smile.
It did, thank you.
Her stomach let out a polite growl, replacing her complex worries with a far simpler need.
Oh, goodness! I do think it's about time I had something to eat.
Allow me to escort you to the dining hall, Pontius said, stepping up beside her. Chef Marmalade can make you whatever you wish. Rarity arched a brow.
I do appreciate the notion, dear, but I think I can find the way there on my own.
Pontius blinked. He looked down to his hooves with a thin-lipped frown, brow furrowed with consternation. After a couple seconds, Rarity realized that the young Pegasus was probably just trying to treat her well, now that they were betrothed. She resisted the urge to let out a sigh.
I suppose I can humor him, for now.
She made a show of looking up and down the hall, making a few confused titters.
Actually, which way was it again? I may have gotten a bit turned around.
He brightened up at that, the frown replaced with a content little smile.
If you'll come with me, my lady.
Rarity allowed him to lead her through the halls. He was somewhat endearing, in a way, earnest and eager to please. For the first time, she realized that Pontius really was just a boy. Even as he marched through the countryside in gleaming steel armor with a soldier on each side, hunting bandits in the woods and being called my lord by ponies twice or more his age, he couldn't be more than 20 years old by her guess. He turned out surprisingly polite compared to his father. Rarity regarded him with new eyes as she followed him through the foyer, and found herself wondering where his mother was. It was at that moment that Rarity became aware of a distant, high-pitched keening. She stiffened, scanning her surroundings as alarm bells went off in her head. Pinkie Pie was out there somewhere, and she was tackle-huggingly excited about something. Rarity's suspicions were confirmed as a pink blur launched itself toward her from her periphery. She had just enough time to brace herself in the proper direction before being bodily slammed into and wrapped in her friend's vice-like grip. Pinkie informed her.
They're here! They're here!
Rarity struggled to catch her breath as she squirmed between Pinkie's hooves.
Pinkie! Too much!
The iron grip released her, and Rarity managed to suck in a lungful of air. Pinkie Pie bounced in place beside her as she lowered her voice to a less piercing sing-song.
They're here! They're here!
Who's here? Pontius asked.
Our friends!
Pinkie chirped. She bounced over to the grand double doors that dominated the foyer, reared up onto her hind legs with a fanciful pirouette, and shoved them both open like a mare both totally oblivious to and unaffected by proper door opening etiquette.